So, Mr. Speaker, on to the budget. This is a shell game of accounting. I'll get back to that later. But I once worked with one of the most smartest people that I worked with. His name was Fabrice. And he said, you can't make the house bigger by thinning the walls. And that's exactly what this government is trying to do. It has no vision, no plan. They're at the end of all of their ideas, and to grow the economy or to make the house bigger, they're resorting to thinning the walls. And I looked through the budget very carefully. Everyone says we're in a productivity crisis. The government acknowledges it. I went through the budget. There's no GDP per capita chart. Wow. We're in a productivity crisis, and the government does not care to tell Canadians how we're doing in GDP per capita. One of my mentors, Hugh Moncrief, said, what gets measured gets done. And obviously, the government does not care about making Canadians wealthier every year. Now, I don't expect anyone to just take my word for it, Mr. Speaker. Let's go to some experts. Don Drummond, former senior civil servant, very smart man. He said, I would grade this budget as a D, but that's very close to F. I actually thought, given the lead-up, we were going to be more tax gimmicks, and maybe we dodged that a bit, but I'll leave it on a D. Bill Morneau says, this was clearly something that while I was there, we resisted, and he's referring to the capital gains changes. We resisted it for specific reasons. We were concerned about the growth of the country. Robert Asselin, another very smart individual who's written a lot about fiscal policy and government spending, he says, I'm worried the government is overspending again in a pre-election setup with higher interest rates, debt servicing costs being very high already and rising fast. Andrew Coyne in the Globe and Mail. Indeed, there is not a single measure in the budget aimed at boosting investment generally. Having spread itself so thin, budget after budget, on less urgent matters, the government finds itself without the capacity to act on the one or two things that really demand its attention, assuming it even had any intention of doing so in the first place. Sahir Khan says, this government is high on aspiration and low on perspiration. I couldn't agree more. Now let's talk about a few of the measures in the budget. On housing, the government wants to increase demand measures by helping those individuals take more money out of their RRSP. They're also helping wealthy developers. I'm surprised to learn my NDP colleagues will be supporting the budget because the only people who can max out their RRSP are very wealthy individuals, and they're going to end up voting for a budget that supports the most wealthy in the country and wealthy developers, except the government vastly under-delivered on its disability benefit. But let's talk a little bit about the accounting tricks, shall we? The Bank of Canada has been losing money, lots of money, billions and billions of dollars a year. Last year, they told us it was a few $billion. This year, we don't actually know. The government is trying to hide that from Canadians because they're not actually disclosing it in the budget. They actually bury it in another line with the Canada Mortgage Bond Program that they've consolidated together. The truth is, because interest rates haven't come down, because government spending's gone up, Bank of Canada losses are higher this year than the government thought they would be last year. And let's spend a minute on the capital gains trick, accounting facade. The government expects it'll get $7 billion in new revenues because of those who transact between now and January 25th. Very convenient. They set a date in the future to make the capital gains tax, they force a bunch of people to transact, and they get a bunch of revenue, which goes to the bottom line. If the government did not get that revenue, Mr. Speaker, they would be offside their debt to GDP ratio, and they would be missing their other fiscal anchor, which was the commitment to keep the budget deficit below $40 billion. There's a big risk to the fiscal framework just sitting there in that budget if people decide not to transact, if for some reason they might think a future government changes its mind, or if they've made the wrong assumptions on how many people will transact. Well, let's talk about extra money for the Canada Revenue Agency. $336 million over 2 years, and another $180 million to write checks to small businesses for the carbon credit rebate.
Wow.
Now, I have a lot of faith and confidence in the people at CRA. They work hard. But there's something wrong over there, or there's wrong in the system of government. Let's take the Bear Trust fiasco. On the very last day, they reversed their decision after all these taxpayers hire accountants and they do the paperwork, they spend thousands of dollars. Mr. Speaker, the people at CRA are doing a great job. But the agency, the CRA itself, doesn't need more money. It needs to be visited by a proctologist. We need to figure out why we continually have implementation problems. And this government's idea is, oh, no, let's give them more to do. People aren't waiting on hold long enough. Let's give them some more programs to deliver. Let's give them some more things to do. The government has a massive capacity problem. It doesn't need to find more things to try to do. It actually needs to do the things it's supposed to do better. We need to make government simpler, not bigger, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my honourable colleague before me talked about the rural top-up. It appears that some individuals in Simcoe North are not getting the rural top-up. We're investigating this, but it makes absolutely no sense. And while we're on the what makes no sense, there is not a single country in the world over this inflationary period that have raised taxes on energy. Not a single country except Canada. For some reason, the government wants to make energy more expensive when people are having a problem paying their bills.
That's crazy.
It absolutely boggles the mind. It leaves one bewildered. Now, on the capital gains tax quickly, the government wants you to believe that there's a pool of people, the 1%ers, and they're the same 1%, and they're the worst people ever. Except guess what? That 1% changes every year because people end up in the 1% or the top 10% for various reasons. They might sell a business, something might happen, they might come into some extra money. They're not the same ugly people, or the top 25% aren't the same nasty, money-hungry, greedy people. They change from year to year. And we need to be careful about how far we try to squeeze people before they start leaving this country. And I look forward to the questions from my colleagues, and I look forward to questions from the NDP who might be able to enlighten us how they can vote for a budget that's going to help wealthy individuals save more money for their RSP for a home, but not for the disabilities benefit. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Hear, hear. Questions and comments? Question Kamal Thayer, the Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, one of the most significant expenditures on a line-to-line is, in fact, the Canada Disability Benefit. It's a substantial $1 billion is a considerable amount of money, believe it or not, across the way. At the end of the day, I'm finding it a little bit confusing to understand what the Conservative Party's policy is on the Canada Disability Fund. That shouldn't surprise anyone because we don't know what their policy is really in terms of the pharmacare plan or the dental plan. We assume based on their voting patterns that they are actually against those initiatives. My question to the member is, does the member support the allocations through the budget towards the programs like the dental program, the pharmacare program, and of course the disability program?
The Honourable Member for Simcoe North.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The disabilities programs, I can't believe the government's pointing to this as something that they're applauding. They actually overpromised and underdelivered. If you want to talk about line items in the budget, let's talk about debt service costs. Debt service costs are now the exact same amount that the GST is to require. I got a bunch of friends I like to go see on Fridays at Frank's Compound, Waxy and Frank. Those guys go for lunch once a week. Now every time they get a bill that has GST on it, they're just paying interest on the debt. So there might be some good things in the budget, Madam Chair, but you don't buy a house because you like the curtains.
Right.
Be right back. We'll go to the boys' room and questions and comments.
Questions et commentaires. L'honorable député de Mirabel.
The honourable member from Mirabel. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Page 83 of the budget. It says that the government explores new measures to broaden access to different options for mortgages, including Muslim mortgages. Now, we know how close the Conservatives are to sometimes praying for their measures, but my honourable member knows the banking system. Is the Conservative Party for or against modifications to our banking statutes and mortgage rules in order to accommodate certain religious minorities, possibly adding certain things that are found in Sharia into our banking laws?
North.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I was surprised to see this in the budget as well, but I must admit I'm not actually an expert in how those kinds of mortgages work. I think, of course, all Canadians would like to believe that Canadians should have access to financial products. I'm interested to see how the government's going to consult on this. I actually don't know what is being proposed. I think we should learn a bit more. But I would say to my wonderful colleague, the government is creating dual classes of mortgage borrowers with respect to insureds and uninsureds on mortgage renewals. The government is allowing insured mortgage holders to shop around on a renewal, but not allowing uninsured mortgage holders to shop for a better rate on renewal without doing the stress test. And that, Madam Speaker, is unfair.
We have time for a brief question. Questions et commentaires. The honourable for Thornton Hill Lambton.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to thank my colleague for an excellent speech. You know, his financial acumen is renowned within our party. And so I guess what I would say to him is, what does he think is missing from this budget that he would have liked to have seen?
The honourable member for Simcoe North.
Madam Chair, a year and a half ago, the government tabled a fall economic statement that showed a balanced budget in 5 years. Now that deficit is $20 billion. Since everyone started telling this government to slow down its spending, the government has added $103 billion of new spending. That's net. The gross number is 156. What I would have liked to see in this budget is some kind of plan.
Here.